Caitlin, a former professional ballerina turned dance educator and career mentor, and this is the Brainy Ballerina Podcast. I am here for the aspiring professional ballerina who wants to learn what it really takes to build a smart and sustainable career in the dance industry. I'm peeling back the curtain of the professional dance world with open and honest conversations about the realities of becoming a professional dancer. Come along to gain the knowledge and inspiration you need to succeed in a dance career on your terms. Hello and welcome to the Brainy Ballerina Podcast. I am your host, Caitlin Sloan, and you are listening to the very first episode of the podcast. I have been dreaming about starting this podcast for a while now, and it finally felt like the right time, and I am just so thrilled to be bringing this to you. I have been interviewing some amazing guests, and I'll be releasing those once a week on Mondays. So those will be coming to you soon, and these are really, really powerful interviews that I cannot wait to share. But before we get into that, I wanted to start and tell you my story, a little bit about me and the business so that you can know where I'm coming from with all of this and what the goal is of this podcast. Because what I really find so powerful is sharing people's stories. I think as dancers, we can get so stuck in looking at one way to do a career or thinking that how someone did something is the way it should always be done. And the truth is there's so many different ways to have a dance career, and every person I interview has a completely different story, and yet they've all had amazing careers. And that's what I hope to share with you, because I think that just hearing someone's story can really change your life and can be so powerful in helping you realize something that you didn't know about yourself or something that you just really needed to hear to keep moving forward and to give you that inspiration or that encouragement. So every single episode, you're going to find something to either be educated, be inspired, be encouraged, or just to have a good laugh. I just really hope that this podcast can be light for dancers who are feeling lost, confused, and just need a little bit of direction. So before I start sharing the episodes, they'll be coming out every Monday. I want to dive into my story and tell you a little bit about me. I grew up dancing in Michigan and Metro Detroit. I was 10 years old when I took my first dance class. Before that, I had done a handful of sports, but nothing really stuck. I was really not very skilled at sports. And so at some point, I think I said I wanted to try dance, and we had gotten a brochure in the mail that was for Rochester School of Dance. And I said, let's try this out. So that's where I ended up going, not knowing that it was an amazing ballet school. It just happened to be close to my house, and we had the brochure in the mail. So that's what we did. And I immediately fell in love with it. And I was in a class to begin with much younger dancers. They were probably like 6 or 7 when I was starting, and I was 10. I was older, but I didn't feel like out of place or like, oh, I'm too cool for this or too old for this. I just loved being in the studio and being a dancer, and I was obsessed. I moved through the levels pretty quickly. Fortunately, they did see something in me, so they kept moving me up quickly so that I was with dancers my own age within about a year, maybe a year and a half. And so I was able to progress through the levels. And when I was, I believe, 12, I joined the performing company. So we had a student pre-professional company, Michigan Ballet Theater, that I joined. And with MBT, I got to do so many amazing productions. We did Nutcracker, we did Sleeping Beauty, and just put on these full-length ballets and get to dance roles like Bluebird, Clara, just get to really dive into classical ballets, understand how a ballet works, how all the different roles are important, how everything just meshes together, and seeing a really professional environment was very, very cool as a young dancer. I grew up really respecting the art of ballet. My teachers I just adored, and it was a really good environment. It was serious. We worked hard, but we really did have a lot of fun, and I never felt like I was in an environment where it was not supportive. I've always felt supported. I always felt like I was in a place where I was excited to go and excited to dance, and it just felt really, really good. So growing up dancing there was a really great experience. I also went away to summer intensives. I did that whole thing. I went to ABT Detroit. I went to Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. I went to Eisenhower Dance Ensemble. I just really loved going away for intensives, and I felt like I grew so much. But then I got to my junior and senior years of high school, and I started to feel a little bit like I was missing out on some of the things my peers were doing. I wanted to be a regular kid. I wanted to go to football games. I wanted to be able to go study at Caribou Coffee on a weeknight. I wanted to just have a more regular life. So the summer after my junior year, I decided not to go to an intensive, and I got a part-time job. I worked at Abercrombie and just kind of had a regular summer. And you know what? It was great. I really felt like that was a good choice for me at the time to pull back. And of course, I took classes in my studio still. I didn't just completely stop dancing, but I decided that I was interested in a more regular childhood life. And that kind of actually started the summer before when I was at Pittsburgh, because they had offered me a year-round position in their program to move there and study with them. And I remember my teacher was so adamant that I should take it. She had a prolific career and she knew this was the path. This was an offer that I should seriously consider. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was not ready to leave home. I was not ready to leave my family. I was a homebody. I still am. It just didn't feel right to me. And I also knew I was getting great training where I was. So I didn't think that it was totally necessary for me to leave. Now would I have progressed and potentially gotten a position in a company like PBT? Maybe. I have no idea what would have happened, but I did not want to trade my normal childhood experience. You only get one, and I didn't feel like it was the right time for me. So my last few years of high school, I was really questioning what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to keep dancing, whether I wanted to hang up the shoes and go to college. But then thinking about college, I didn't know what else I wanted to do. My life was so wrapped up in dance. So I ended up auditioning for a couple of college dance programs, but I still wanted to stay in state. And so I auditioned for just a few that were closer to me. And I ended up going to Grand Valley State University for dance. I had a scholarship there. They had a really good ballet program. And so I decided that would be a good fit for me. And I thought, well, I can kind of decide if I want to keep dancing or not while I am there. And I also double majored in exercise science, thinking I'm going to prepare for a second career. I'm really interested in exercise science. I'm really interested in physical therapy. This is a little bit of the prereq. So I'm going to do both while I'm in college and have this backup plan. So I get to college and I loved it. My first semester was amazing. We had incredible rep. I got to do the soloist role in La Source, a Balanchine ballet. I got to dance in Giselle, and I was just doing ballets I'd never done before and getting opportunities I hadn't had. And it was so cool to go from a schedule where I had to go to school all day and then go to dance at night and never get enough sleep, never get my homework all the way done, always feel like I was not able to do everything. And to go to a place where now my school was dance. So I would dance all day, and that was my school. And I did have homework a little bit because I had academic classes too, but nowhere near the level that I had in high school, nowhere near as many hours. It was just such a breath of fresh air to be like, now I can focus on my dancing, and this is my school. And how cool is that? And the program that I was in started off really ballet based when I first went there. And while I was in the program, it changed directors 2 times. So I was in college for 3 years. I graduated early. Every single year, I had a different director of the program. And so after my freshman year, the director who had been there, who was ballet based, left. And then we had a director who was very modern based. She was very Graham focused. And so the program changed immensely. And I found myself really doing a lot more modern and really being thrown into this and being a little bit frustrated because I had gone there to do ballet. Little did I know how much that was helping me and giving me strength and helping me for my future career. And then my junior/senior year, the program changed leaders again, and we had a whole nother director come in who was also modern based, but a very different style of modern, more release technique, less structured. I always think of Graham as being kind of like the ballerinas modern. This was so different and a whole new challenge for me. So once again, I was really challenged. I was really thrown into a different style of movement, and at the time felt frustrated with it, but I really could now see how good that was for me. I was also on my college dance team, the Laker dance team, which was so much fun. And we did hip hop, jazz, and pom. And we performed at all the games, football, basketball games. We did nationals in Florida every year. That's where I met some of my best friends that are still my closest friends to this day. So that was also a great experience, but I was probably doing too much. Looking back now, I can see that I had gotten to the point again where maybe I was just comfortable having a really full schedule, because while I started out freshman year having a pretty manageable schedule, by the time I was in my last year, I had once again made it so that my days were 14, 15-hour days of dancing and classes, and I was exhausted. I was so tired, and I was going into my junior year, and I realized that I had the credits to graduate in 3 years because I had been taking so many classes to try to do 2 majors in 4 years. I just looked around at what I wanted to do with my future and where I wanted to be, and I realized that while I had grown as a dancer so much in college, in different styles and movement quality and confidence and maturity, what I was lacking was ballet technique. My ballet technique had gone down since being in college from where it was when I was a senior in high school or a freshman in college. And I still saw myself being in a ballet company. And I felt like if I spent another year in the school, I didn't know if I would have the opportunity. I felt like my point work was so weak, and I just was really worried that I wasn't going to have what it took. And so I decided I'm going to graduate early and I'm going to go for it. I'm ready now to go into the quote unquote real world, audition for companies, and do the thing. So I spent the second part of my senior year auditioning everywhere. And Grand Valley is near Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is about a 2.5-hour drive from Chicago. So basically my strategy was to drive to Chicago most weekends and try to fit in 3 to 4 auditions every time I went. And it was very, very hard and really disheartening because I got cut a lot. I didn't really know how to audition. I was very shocked by how different the audition process was for professional companies than for summer intensives. Summer intensives, I always did really well. I typically got in. They liked me. For companies, I was getting cut very quickly a lot of the time, and it was just really disheartening, and I was really questioning whether this was going to happen for me, but I also didn't know what else I was going to do. I just kept plugging away, to be honest. And when I was a freshman in college, we had a guest artist come in, Cheiko Amada, and she had set Giselle on us. And she was one of the associate directors of Ballet Tucson. And so I decided I'm going to go audition for her. I liked working with her. I wanted to go look into this company. So in June, which is very late in the season of audition season for dancers, but in June, I flew out to Arizona. I did the audition, and then I got in the mail a couple weeks later a big package. You get emails now with your contract a lot of the time, but back then, I got a nice big package. I opened it, and it was a contract for a traineeship with the company. And I really debated what to do because it was unpaid. It was across the country. I just didn't know how I was going to make that work. Financially, logistically, it didn't really make sense in my brain. And I was really just thinking, maybe I should just turn this down and stay home for a little bit and just figure out my next step. And I remember my dad took me out to breakfast one morning and was like, "Where's your head at with all of this? What are you thinking?" And I just said, "I don't know if I should do this. It doesn't seem practical." And he just said, "You have to try. This has been your dream since you were young, and you have to just try it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it, but you have to go and see what happens." And my parents have always been so supportive, and they've been supportive of me physically, emotionally, and financially. And so while they weren't necessarily paying my bills straightforward, I did have to work, and I was putting things on credit cards and that kind of thing. It wasn't like they said, "Well, pay your way." I did know that they would help me out if I got into a pickle. I knew that I had that backup, and that really was helpful to know that my parents were there for me, and it made a big difference in my decision. And so my dad and me drove my Dodge Caliber all the way from Michigan to Arizona. It was a 30-hour drive with all of my stuff in the back. Set me up in this apartment that I had found with random roommates where you could rent just a room. And my dad left, and I was just in Arizona by myself. And it was pretty scary, but I just did what I had always done. I just woke up and went to company class and started rehearsals. And it was like, okay, here we go. Let's do this. My very first ballet there was actually also Giselle, which was pretty cool and kind of a full circle of moments. And it was a little bit of a shock. Like I had said, I had not been doing as much ballet, and now I was in point shoes we danced 10 to 4 with the company, and then I had class in the evening from 6 to 7:30 with the students. So I was in point shoes most of the day in a brand new environment that was a little bit scary, to be honest, coming straight out of college and feeling like I was now a small fish in a big pond. I struggled, to be fair, and I had a little bit of an ego coming from college and feeling like I was a strong dancer in the program and going to a new place where I was now at the bottom of the barrel and didn't really know where my voice was, didn't know what was, I guess, appropriate of when to speak up and when to not. And I had a little bit of a hard time with that transition, but it was exactly what I needed at that time. I really needed that kick in the butt to get back into this hardcore ballet training that I had been lacking, and it forced me to just get back out there and rediscover and refine everything that I had trained that had just been a little bit dormant. I had the opportunity to work with Amanda McCarrow and John Gardner, who were former ABT principals, and they were our associate artistic directors. And they are two of the most amazing people I've ever met. I adored them, and they taught me so much. And one of the biggest things they taught me was how to strike that balance of hard work and fun, because they were the kindest, most fun people, and they also worked so hard, and they really pushed us, but they also saw us as human beings and knew when to cut us slack, when to say, take the point shoes off, let's just work on spacing, or when we needed a 5. I mean, they were just so keyed in to what it was like to be a dancer. And I feel like sometimes when you leave your dance career and move on to a leadership role, it's almost like you start to forget what it was like. And I never felt like that with them. They were just dancers still at heart, and they really knew exactly what we were going through, and they knew when to push and when to pull back. And it was really, really a great lesson for me in working with them as I started teaching later and started to be in more leadership roles and realizing what kind of leader I wanted to be. I always came back to that experience. So I was in Tucson for 2 years. I was a trainee, and then I was an apprentice the next year. And I found it really tricky because, one, I was very homesick. I really missed being in the Midwest in general. I didn't necessarily need to come back to Michigan, but I just missed the Midwest. I was so far from home. I could not get in my car and drive home. I needed to buy a plane ticket if I wanted to go home, and that was not attainable on what I was making. And so that was really tricky. I was working a ton of hours in my second job as a waitress, trying to support myself. And in fact, I actually had multiple jobs, babysitting and waitressing. And there was days where I would go babysit from 7 to 9, dance 10 to 4, and then waitress 4:30 to 10:30 at night, and wake up the next morning and do it over and over again. And it was just very crushing. I couldn't maintain that. And I didn't see a way out. I didn't see a point where that schedule was going to change, where I was going to have enough income to not be doing that. And going into my second season as an apprentice, I had a really bad injury. I tore my calf about 3 days before we premiered our fall show. And I was, of course, out for the show. And I ended up being out for a lot longer than I anticipated. And I just never really came back from that. I was getting cast less. I was frustrated. I didn't feel like I was rehabbing as well as I wanted to. I just was kind of stuck. I was getting frustrated. They were getting frustrated with me. It felt like the relationship was starting to break down a little bit, and I was just feeling unhappy and like I needed to move on. But I didn't know for sure if they were going to offer me a contract. I was like 90% sure they weren't going to, but I didn't know for sure. And so I had been sending out materials to companies. I wasn't getting a lot of bites, but I did have a few friends dancing with Missouri Contemporary Ballet. And I reached out to them and just asked them what they thought, because I was thinking maybe I want to branch out into more contemporary. Maybe this classical ballet world isn't for me. I thought this is what I wanted, but maybe it's not. And so I reached out to some friends, and they said, you should definitely audition. This is right up your alley. We love it here. It's a great environment. Definitely send your stuff in. So I sent it in, and I got invited to take a company class audition. So our last show in Tucson was Swan Lake. We were doing it in May, and we had our personals right around the show. And it was actually interesting because we had some dancers who had theirs before the show, and those ended up being the dancers who got contracts. And then there was a list of us who had ours after the final show, and we didn't get contracts. And I remember being still in my stage makeup and sweaty and going into my personal and just being told I didn't have a contract. And they were so kind about it. And my director wrote me a letter of recommendation. She could not have been kinder, but it was, I think, clear to both of us that it wasn't the right fit. And so that was honestly a relief, because if I had gotten a contract, I might have taken it because I was scared. I didn't know. what I was going to do. And even knowing that it was time to move on. So it was a good thing on both ends, but it was pretty crushing to basically be told that they don't have a place for you. But fortunately, I had gotten this company class audition for MCB, and I flew out the very next morning. So we finished our run of Swan Lake on a Sunday afternoon, I think, and I flew out the next morning to Missouri, auditioned the very next day. And I can't explain to you the feeling I had when I walked into that studio. It was just like I could breathe again. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years, and all of a sudden I felt like, wow, this is where I need to be. And I had arguably the best audition of my life. I've never thought of myself as a good auditioner, which I know is a very limiting belief, but that was how I felt at the time. I had always thought of myself as someone who you need to get to know. If you work with me for long enough, then you'll realize I have great work ethic, that I take corrections, that I'm smart. But I don't always show that well in an audition process. I had the best audition of my life. I just felt like this was a job I needed to get. I went into it with such a fire. We did rep, and I also felt like I nailed the rep. And actually, even the rehearsal director asked my friends who danced there, "Did you teach Caitlin the rep last night?" Because it seemed like she already knew it. And no, she just got it. And it was just like, it felt so like it was at home in my body. And I just was like, yes, this is exactly what I want to be doing. After my class, I talked to the director and she offered me an apprenticeship on the spot, and I was just elated. It was exactly what I wanted. I remember staying the day and watching company rehearsals and watching the rep and just having goosebumps, thinking, I'm going to get to do this. This is incredible. So that was just a huge turning point in my career of finding a place that was the right fit for me and accepting that was okay, that I didn't need to be in a classical ballet company to be successful and to find happiness in my career. I could do something totally different. And it was such a relief. So I moved to Missouri. I danced my first season there as an apprentice, and I was dancing so much. I was just totally thrown into things, and I got chances to go in as an understudy. I really felt like I was doing it. And I remember at the end of my year, I talked to my director because I didn't know if I was going to get a contract for the next year. Often they would do apprenticeships for 2 years. But at this point, I had been out of college for 3 years. I had been dancing without pay for 3 years. And I had decided, I love this. I want to be here, but I also cannot keep doing this. I am completely done dancing in a company setting for free. And I remember going to my director and essentially telling her that and saying, I don't know if you see me as a company member, but I can't stay here as an apprentice. And I'm okay with that. And it wasn't like an ultimatum. It was just, I guess, a boundary of me saying, that's okay if you decide that I'm not ready, but I'm not staying another year as an apprentice. I'll move on. If it's not for me, I'm ready to move on. But fortunately, I got the contract. And I ended up spending the next 6 years dancing as a company member at Missouri Contemporary Ballet and had some of the most incredible experiences of my life. I danced in so many amazing works, got to work with some really powerful guest choreographers. I got to tour around the country, and actually as far as South Korea, we got to go on tour for a festival for our sister city in South Korea. And I got to travel to New York and dance. I got to dance the lead role of Alice in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was one of my favorite moments of my career. I did have, of course, some big setbacks. I had injuries. I had years that didn't go as well. This almost deserves its own separate podcast because my time at MCB there was so much that I want to share about it. But it was just, again, such a breath of fresh air to find a place where I felt like I was appreciated for the dancer that I was, and where I felt like I was allowed to make mistakes. My director, Karen, one of her best qualities is she wants people just to go for it. She wants her dancers to leave it on the floor. She would rather see you fall down going for it than play it safe. And I just thrived in that environment. I had those instincts as a young child as a dancer, and then I kind of lost them as I got older and got into a more rigid atmosphere, and going back to that was really hard at first to find that in myself. But then once I did find that self-trust again and realized that I could go for it and make a mistake and I wasn't going to be in trouble, it was okay, because as long as I was dancing and I was giving it my all, that's what mattered. That really changed the way I felt about dance, and it really made me fall in love with dancing again. And it was just really the place I needed to be. The other part about dancing at MCB that I really enjoyed was how much experience we were given and options and opportunities to explore other areas of work. The year I joined, this company was starting a school. So I was immediately given the opportunity to teach in the school, and I was mentored by my good friend Carrie, who was a school director at the time, and she really taught me how to teach. And I taught before that while I was in college, but I wouldn't say that I knew what I was doing. And this was the first time I had really learned how to teach, how to take a class of young dancers from start to finish. And I fell in love with teaching. I was teaching maybe 20 hours a week between multiple studios, and I just adored it. It was really great too, because one thing about MCB that I loved was our schedule was Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. And so it really gave you the ability to teach at night if you wanted to, or have another job on the weekends, because being a small company, the salary still meant that most of us needed to have second jobs. But unlike other small companies where I had danced, where the schedule was so crazy that it was kind of unattainable to work enough hours outside of it to make enough money to survive, this allowed me to have both. And that was really huge for me too. Now being in my almost mid-20s, I was like, I really need to have some stability in my life. I don't want to lean on my parents. I don't want to have to ask for that if I don't have to. And so it was really a relief to be able to actually be able to make enough of an income to feel like I could pay my rents no problem. I was comfortable. After about 3 years in the company, our school director, Carrie, was moving on. And so she approached me and asked if I'd be interested in the job. And I really leaped at it. I was ready for a more leadership role. I had a lot of great ideas. A lot of them, I was young and I was excited and didn't realize how hard they would be to execute, but I was just really powered up and fired up about this opportunity. And so I became school director of the School of MCB, and I was school director for 4.5 years. And in that time, I learned a lot and I made a lot of mistakes. I found it very challenging to be in a leadership role with my peers. And so we'd be dancing together and we would be peers during the day. And then we would go into the school setting and I would be the school director and I'd have teachers that I'd have to have hard conversations with. And I found it really hard to separate those things, my friends, and then also being the boss in this sense. And I didn't always know how to handle the situations. I definitely leaned toward being too tough in many circumstances because I felt like I had to for some reason to prove myself. I was just in that stage of life where I was young and I didn't think people would respect me if I wasn't tough, which is of course so misguided, but it was just where I was at. So I felt like I had a couple of tough years just trying to navigate that. I felt like as far as teaching students, working with the school, running that side of things, working with parents, I felt like I did a really great job there, but I did find it difficult to navigate those relationships with my peers. But I felt like I really did grow in that and get better at that. And at some point, I did decide to go back to school and went to the University of Missouri to get my grad certificate in nonprofit management because we were a nonprofit and I was running a large portion of it. And as a small company, there's not a lot of staff members. So I was doing pretty much everything within the school for a time. And I didn't always know exactly what I was doing. I was learning a lot through, the University of Google, but I wanted to become more proficient. So I went back to school for that. And one of my classes was human resources and management. And that was huge for me because as dancers, most of us don't work in a corporate setting. We're not familiar with HR. We're not familiar with those kind of policies. And so to have a course on this and realize how companies operate in that way was really eye-opening and helped me to work more professionally in that way and learn some good practices that really helped me become a much better leader. So going into my 7th season at MCB, I had decided I was ready to retire. At the end of my 6th year, I went to my director and said, next year is going to be my last year. And she said, I kind of saw that coming, which I thought was interesting. But it was like we kind of were in agreement that, it was time. And I was 30 at the time and I was married and we were wanting to have kids. And I didn't see myself doing both. Partially it's because I really hadn't seen it happen a lot. You don't see a lot of dancers having kids and continuing to dance. So I didn't have a lot of examples to go off of. But even now, knowing what I know now, having kids, I know that it would have been really hard for me because my schedule was just so insane. And I really relish the fact that I get to spend most days with my kids, and it wouldn't have been the case. And so it was the right choice for me to make that transition at the time. And I was so lucky because my director offered me the role of associate executive director after I retired. So that was huge. The fact that she put that trust in me. She has been doing both roles the entire time the company has been around, both artistic director and executive director. So the fact that she saw that in me and put that trust in me, that I was basically in training to become executive director and someday take over that role, meant so much to me. And it was just a huge opportunity. And I was really, really excited. And I felt so excited about my future with the company. I felt very grateful for where my path was going and what was going to be coming my next step. I was sad. And as the year went on, I started to have moments where I had to give a speech at one point. I was doing a TEDx speech at a middle school about being a dancer. And I remember practicing with my husband and I just sobbed the whole time. And he said, I think you just realized that you're retiring. Like, it hadn't really hit me on an emotional level until that moment. And so it was a hard year knowing that it was my last year and knowing that every moment that was going to be one of the last. That was tough. But I was really excited about the future and where that was going. And so I retired in June. I started my new job July 1st of the new fiscal year. And August 1st, my husband had an interview with a company in Indiana and got a new job offer. And our whole marriage, our whole relationship, we had really talked about that he was willing to move to Missouri. We didn't meet in Missouri. We met in Michigan, where we're both from. But he moved to Missouri for me, and he was willing to stay there as long as I was dancing, as long as I was doing this career, because he understood that this is the life of a dancer. So he had really sacrificed a lot professionally for my career at this point. But we had discussed, at some point when I retired from dancing, that he would potentially look for more options and look to advance his career. Now, of course, I didn't think it was going to happen that fast, but he did get a really good job offer. And after we talked about it for a while, we kind of decided that that was the right move for us, for our family, for our future with children, and just wanting to have the stability that we needed. It was going to be the right move. And so that was a really hard conversation with my director, having to tell her after only being in that job for a month that we were going to move and I was going to leave. And I ended up finishing out the semester with the school. I went through December. My husband was going back and forth between Indiana and Missouri while I finished out my semester and my commitments. And then we moved in December. And I went through one of the worst periods of my life. I was so depressed. I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt like I lost my identity. And I started working at another dance school, and I loved that school, but I was working as the office administrator, and I wasn't really teaching. I think I had one class Saturday mornings, and that was it. The rest of the time I was sitting at the desk, taking payments, doing that kind of thing, and it was just crushing me to be sitting at the desk and hearing the classes going on and hearing the teachers and just not being a part of that, not being in the classroom. I was absolutely crushed by that. The hardest part, though, was that I felt like in Missouri and in Columbia, I was really well respected by the community. I felt like I was making a difference. I really felt like what I did made a difference every single day. And then I was in a new role where I didn't really feel that. I felt like I'm just a paper pusher. I'm just taking payments, I'm writing receipts, I'm sending emails. I didn't really feel like what I was doing was making a difference. And that was really, really hard. I was really fortunate because I did build a community there and I did find such amazing people who were so supportive of me. And when I told my boss that I was unhappy, she was wonderful and she offered me a position teaching. Fortunately, one opened up, so I was able to transition into that role and just really blossomed back into myself and started to become myself again and realize how pivotal being in a teaching role was for me as a person. But there was this period of time where I really felt lost and I really didn't know who I was in a new place with new people, a new environment, a new position. Everything in my life had changed so quickly and I didn't know who I was. I just needed something for me to help me just kind of ground myself again. And I remember one night I just started brainstorming, what could I do? What kind of business could I start? When I was teaching more, I would always be online looking for resources, especially for like our summer camps when we would do these summer camps for our younger students based on a classical ballet. And so, for instance, it'd be a Swan Lake week. And I'd always be looking online, at the last minute, of course, because I was trying to do 10 million things for a quick synopsis that I could hand out to them or some fun facts about the ballet or that kind of thing. And I could never find anything that was really succinct and visually pleasing and all of the things I was looking for. And so I thought, what if I just made those resources? So I spent some time creating all of these resources for ballet dancers and ballet teachers. And it was classical ballet synopsises and guides and terminology, stage directions, all of these kind of things. And I was really brainstorming what I wanted my company to be called, because at the beginning I was really just like, it's just going to be principal resources you can buy. And I was going to have an Etsy shop, and that was that. And so I'm brainstorming what I want it to be called. And I remember being in the shower one day and it came to me, the Brainy Ballerina, because I was thinking, what is the most important thing that I try to teach my students? And I kept coming back to the concept of being a smart dancer. And it just popped into my head like a light bulb literally went off, and I thought the Brainy Ballerina. And that's how my company started. And it was, like I said, just an Etsy shop with printable resources, which I do still have, by the way. But that was all I had at first. And through this next year, I went through a lot more change in my life. I had my first child. I had a very tough pregnancy, so I was really struggling with that. He was born 4 weeks early. He was a 5-pound preemie, born at the end of December, so we had to be really careful with him. And then 3 months later, COVID started. And then we had to move again. My husband got promoted. So in this span of time, my brain capacity there was nothing for the business. I completely had to let that go for a while, and I really didn't do anything with it for a long time, like maybe 8 months. I just kind of let it slide. I still had my shop. People would still buy things sporadically, but I was not promoting it. I was not doing social media. It was very much just out there on its own. We moved to Wisconsin, and about 4 months after we moved, I remember talking to my husband and just finally felt like my feet were underneath me again, and I could dream about what I wanted to do. And I wasn't going back to teaching yet because it was still pretty early in COVID. Studios weren't hiring teachers. That was a weird time. And so I said, maybe I should dive back into the Brainy Ballerina. Maybe I have a business. I've registered it. Maybe I should actually do something with it. That's what I did. And I ended up doing a lot of social media at that time. That was my main thing I was doing. And it was kind of like a lifeline because I needed this connection to other dancers and other people and other adults, to be quite honest, because I was mostly just with my small child all the time, who I adore, but I needed some adult conversation. And so I started making these connections and really found a community of dancers and people that I adored. And the more I started talking to dancers, the more I realized how lost we all were in this industry and how bewildering it can be, and how much dancers just really didn't always know what to do and what path to take, and all of it just felt really, really hard. That's when I started diving into the concept of career mentoring, because I looked around, I didn't see that many people who were doing that, and realizing that's what dancers really need. They need someone in their corner who they can talk to, who's been in this industry, who can help them navigate all of the ups and downs, all of the crazy stuff we go through, and figure out how to just organize their career in a more intentional way and think like a business person. That is how the Brainy Ballerina has transitioned to where it is today, where I'm mainly focusing on career mentoring and career resources for dancers. I work with dancers one-on-one to help them determine what success means to them in their career. And then we make a plan. We sit down and we put pen to paper and we figure out, what are they going to do to make this happen? How are they going to achieve their dreams? I also do a lot of studio workshops, and I have a lot of digital resources for dancers that they can use to help them prepare for auditions, to start to get intentional about their careers. I did go back to teaching eventually, and I teach at the School of Madison Ballet, which I just adore too. And at this point, I'm only teaching 1 day a week. Just with my life how it is now, I now have 2 small children, and I am really trying to strike the balance of wanting to be in the classroom and teach more and work my business more, but also wanting to just savor these moments I have with them while they are young and being in the moment. And it's a constant battle of trying to figure that out. But that basically takes us to where we are today. Now I am 5 years into my business, and it felt like the right time to launch the podcast because I really felt like I've had so many conversations with other dancers, with other people in this industry, and they're so prolific and they have so much to say and they've taught me so much that I just thought, people need to hear this. People need to have this information. That's why I decided to start the podcast. And I know that this will be a work in progress, that we will figure this out together. I welcome feedback. I want to hear from you about what guests you want to see on, what topics you want to have covered. This is your podcast, and I'm just so excited to bring amazing people to you. I hope that you're able to feel encouraged, inspired, educated, and mostly just seen for who you are as a dancer. See yourself in these people and the stories that they have to tell, because they are really amazing, and it's just been so fun already diving into this. So stay tuned for new episodes coming out every Monday. I did drop 3 episodes today, so if you are listening to this one, it's the first of 3 that you can sort of binge on this very first day, but moving forward, it'll be 1 a week. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to take this journey with you. Thank you for tuning in to the Brainy Ballerina Podcast. If you found this episode insightful, entertaining, or maybe a bit of both, I would so appreciate you taking a moment to leave a rating and hit subscribe. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll join our community of dancers passionate about building a smart and sustainable career in the dance industry. Plus, your ratings help others discover the show too. I'll be back with a new episode next week. In the meantime, be sure to follow along on Instagram at The Brainy Ballerina for your daily dose of dance career guidance.